gold is where the world seems to be headed. They're talking about trading either gold directly or trading in a currency, whether it's a digital currency or, bank, some kind of new currency, but ultimately anchored to gold. That gold is going to be what gives value to the currency. So the only question is, do you believe that the issuer, the behind, the token or the currency, that the gold is actually there and that it's committed to maintain the relationship between the currency and gold? But that's all they have to do. I mean, they don't, I don't think another fiat currency is going to replace the dollar. I think the world will be done with fiat. It's not going to be, okay, so the dollar didn't work, we're just going to put the crown on the euro or something. Why? So we got to go back to gold. The world has to go back to what worked. And that was gold. And I think that's why gold is $5,000 an ounce. It's not an accident. 2 years ago, it was $2,000 an ounce. So why is it up at 5,000? Because the world is already making that switch. Central banks are moving out of dollars into gold. That is what's replacing the dollar. It's not the euro, it's not the pound, it's not the RMB, it's not the yen, it's gold. And that trend is going to continue because gold works. And gold is neutral. You're not, giving any one nation some power over everybody else. Nobody gets the privilege because nobody can print gold. And gold is not simultaneously someone else's liability. When you own treasuries, you're ultimately beholden to the U.S. government. The U.S. government could decide they're going to put a moratorium. They're not going to pay you your interest. They're going to cancel the treasuries. So it's the U.S. liability. You're beholden. But if you've got gold within your own borders in a vault, that's yours. I mean, unless America is going to, send the troops into your country to physically invade you and break into your vaults and steal your gold, they can't take it. And so I think that's what central banks want. They want their own autonomy, their own independence. They don't want to be beholden to another country. Gold worked for hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years as money. And in fact, when we went to Bretton Woods after the Second World War, the only reason the world accepted the dollar system was because the dollar itself was as good as gold, because it was not only backed by gold, but redeemable on demand into gold. So we didn't go off the gold standard when we went on the dollar standard. We just used the dollar as a proxy for gold. But in 1971, when Nixon said, no more, we're severing that link, we're defaulting on that promise, that's when the dollar became nothing but fiat. And even though the dollar got marked down because it lost about 2/3 of its value against other currencies, gold went from $35 to $800, right? We had, oil went from $3 a barrel to $40 a barrel. Like, we really marked down the dollar. The world stayed on that system despite the fact that the dollar was no longer backed by anything. And that is what allowed, 40 or 50 years of profligacy on the part of the United States. Once we got the world hooked on the dollar, right, we just kept cranking them out. And we used that to massively expand the size of government and dole out all these goodies to American voters for free. But now the world, it has had enough of that. They cannot subsidize American profligacy anymore. And they're not going to, keep loaning us money when we're obviously never going to pay it back. We're just going to inflate or default. And so I think that system is coming to an end. But we go back to the gold system because gold worked. It's the only thing that does work. There's some people that think, we're going to use Bitcoin instead of gold. And I think that's laughable. Well, I thought the U.S. economy is already weakening. That's obvious by the data that a lot of people don't want to address. And the war is obviously going to impact on that. I think psychologically, if we don't have a quick victory, it's going to be a problem. Clearly, it's driving up prices for certain goods, energy, food. That's going to be a problem. The cost of funding the war is going to be a problem because it means we have bigger deficits, which means we have to borrow more money. That puts upward pressure on interest rates. That puts upward pressure on inflation. And as interest rates go up, that too puts upward pressure on rates because higher interest rates means it costs us more to finance the debt. We have to borrow more to pay more. So we're in that, that death spiral. So all of this is bad news. And then, of course, politically, it's, a lot of people voted for Trump because they didn't want war. I mean, that was one of the things that at least I still liked about the president. I didn't like his economic policies. I didn't like the tariffs. I didn't like the big deficit spending of the big, beautiful bill. But at least, he kept the peace until now he started a war. So now I don't like the foreign policy or the domestic policy. And I think there are going to be a lot of voters are going to be upset about that. Now, if home prices really start to fall, I mean, on the one hand, you could say that people who want to buy a house might be happy that the houses they want to buy are cheaper. But if mortgage rates go up, even if the price of the house goes down, they still can't afford it. And even if they can buy the house, they can't afford to heat it or cool it or pay the electric bills or, whatever. But the big problem is going to be the people who already own homes and now their home is down 25, 30% and all their home equity is gone. So that's going to be a big issue. And I think the president even knows that. That's why he's come out and stated that he doesn't want home prices to go down. Even though he acknowledges that there's an affordability problem, he doesn't want to solve the affordability problem by actually making houses more affordable. He doesn't want houses to come down in cost so that people can buy them. He wants to keep the prices up so that the people who already own them can pretend they're rich. Well, if they have to stop pretending, that's going to be a problem. But of course, if they keep pretending, that's actually a bigger problem. It's just a longer term problem. No, I wasn't a big fan of trust busting Teddy Roosevelt. He was more of a populist president. I'm more of a Grover Cleveland kind of guy, who is a Democrat. But, and Donald Trump speaks fondly about that period, the Gilded Age where America ran on tariffs, but he confuses, logically, the fact that we ran on tariffs. He thinks that America was wealthy because of the tariffs. And no, it was wealthy because government was so small back then that all we needed was some tariffs to pay for it. That's why the country was booming, because we had gold money. We didn't have a central bank and we didn't have a welfare state. We didn't have Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, any of these agriculture programs or, commerce, none of this stuff. The government was tiny. The government was less than 1/10 of its current size relative to the GDP back then. It was an afterthought. And in fact, none of the states had income taxes either. So the state taxes were low. So Americans were free. They kept what they earned. They didn't have to hire accountants. They didn't have to hire lawyers. They didn't have to keep track of what they earned and fork over a big chunk of it to the government. People were free. Businesses were free, and so we had a booming economy. We boomed like no other economy the world had ever seen. That's why millions and millions of people from all around the world came to America, because we offered something that no other country had: freedom, upward mobility. That was the American dream. Anybody, no matter how meager your circumstances that you're born into, you could rise to the top. You could go from the mailroom to the boardroom if you just work hard. Didn't matter who you were or who you knew. It was your own ambition, what you're willing to do. And that was the American attitude, the rugged individual, right? And that was the heyday of America. Once we got really rich and we started bringing in the welfare state and growing government, we started on this downward slope. But we probably reached our absolute peak in relative wealth and prosperity in the 50s, the 60s. And then it was downhill. I mean, the 60s really started going downhill. And then more recently, the last 20 years, we started accelerating. And that's why you're starting to see, the incumbents constantly losing, because now we're on a much bigger trajectory where the standard of living is really imploding out from under a lot of other people, despite the fact that we have all this technology now that we didn't have, which is the only thing saving us. I mean, what if we didn't have that? What if we were still operating under 1960s technology today? I mean, there's no way we could even survive.